Yo ho 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 ho. What's going on, you guys? Welcome to trèSci Weekly, episode 49. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Ullman, alongside Mush the cat. And that's it. So, you guys will probably notice, first and foremost, that Tom is not here alongside me this week. Unfortunately, he's feeling a little bit under the weather today, so our well wishes go out to him. Hope that he gets well soon. The second thing you'll probably notice is that we are not streaming from the normal living room set. This is actually my bedroom. Going to be a little bit lo-fi this week, as Kyle is also not joining me this week. He is on vacation, so hope that he's enjoying that. For the rest of the hour, it's just going to be me. So, sorry if that bums any of you guys out. I see that we do have some people watching, so if you guys can let me know how the kind of the levels are, if the volume is good on the microphone. I'm just using my normal webcam mic and camera, so let me know if everything sounds good, looks good. Otherwise, I can try to adjust things on the fly. If you're just joining us for the first time, thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry that you're not catching trèSci Weekly at its prime. This is, of course, trèSci Weekly. This is the show where typically Tom and I would bring you the trending science news topics of the week, try to break them down, explain them as best we can, and then offer our thoughts and opinions on them. Yeah, so Karen Riley in the chat says all good. That's good to hear. Yeah, you guys that are watching live in the chat right now, I'm going to be depending on you to kind of keep the communication going. You know, chat back and forth with me, commentate questions, anything that you can throw at me will be great, because right now you're kind of watching the true ramblings of an insane person that's just talking to, you know, their cat behind them. That's it. Yes, so if you're watching the live show, thank you so much. We go live every Monday night at 8:30 p.m. On our YouTube channel. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, you should go ahead and do that. That would be a huge help to us. If you have, thank you so much. If you like what you see here, you can give this a thumbs up. If you don't, you can give it a thumbs down. Either way, the feedback is good, keeps us honest. If you're watching this on the replay, you can drop us a comment below. Of course, we'll get back to you on anything that you thought was kind of interesting during the show. If you can't get enough trèSci on just Monday night and you want more, you can go to any of the various social media websites that we're on, whether that be facebook.com/trèSciWeekly, twitter.com/trèSciWeekly, instagram.com/trèSciWeekly, and if you're feeling extra generous and want to support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/trèSciWeekly and subscribe to us for $1 or $2 a month. That would, of course, help us out quite a bit. One more piece of housekeeping before I move on. We are going to be hosting an event at the Watch Hill Ferry Terminal in Patchogue. It's going to be a stargazing event. It's called Stargazing on the River. Some of you guys probably saw the Facebook event going around. So yeah, that's going to be on March 2nd from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. It's being organized by the Patchogue Medford Library. And we're going to be there with telescopes in hand. We're also going to be inviting the Stony Brook Astronomy Club to help us out that night. So it's going to be fun. I believe that the library is going to be kind of registering people for the event. So it would be a good idea if you're interested to sign up for that early, because I think there's like a maximum of 100 people that they're going to allot. So yeah, check that out. I'll actually drop the link to the Facebook event in the chat right now, so that if anybody is interested, you can check it out. So, hello everybody, Karen, Nancy, and other Karen. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining me tonight. Without any further ado, I'm going to jump right on into the news, the lightning round. I do have access to OBS software, so I'll be able to bring up some pictures and things, websites, so it won't be too boring. You won't have to just watch my face the whole time. So let's go with the first story. This comes by way from Science Magazine, or News from Science on Twitter, and they're talking about cloning, actually, which is a topic that I've not really thought too much about since we even started doing trèSci. Yeah, the cloning sort of hullabaloo has waned in years, but they tweeted out, 20 years after Dolly the sheep, scientists in China have used the same method to clone primates for the first time. So, when we're talking about cloning, this is something that was kind of a big splash about 20 years ago when the Dolly the sheep clone happened. And I remember being in middle school, or not even middle school, elementary school, and hearing a lot of people talking about it and not really understanding exactly what cloning meant. Nowadays I have a better kind of grasp on genetics, a little bit better grasp on genetics. I still wouldn't call myself an expert on the topic, but here's what I have for you. So the method that they used is called somatic cell nuclear transfer. And basically, the way I understand it is, in order to pull this off, they take the nucleus of a cell that's like a tissue cell, maybe a skin cell or something like this. They extract the nucleus out of this cell and basically transfer it into where the nucleus would be in a living female egg cell, which they have taken the nucleus out of. So that would be a nucleusless egg cell. Basically, that kind of reminds me of how stem cell research works, where now this nucleus is going to reprogram the cell to basically adopt all of the genetic information from the prior organism that it came from. And basically you can, give birth to a genetically identical creature. So this was something that was kind of done about 20 years ago with Dolly the sheep. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. And now it's sort of come into the limelight once again with two genetically identical long-tailed macaques, or little monkeys. So it's kind of rehashing some of the ethical questions that we have when it comes to cloning. And now that I have a better understanding of it, I feel like I can kind of weigh in on the topic a little bit more. So, 2 healthy monkeys were born from over 60 surrogate mothers. So, the odds here are not really very good, right? 2 out of 60 means that this isn't really a reliable method. Just for kicks, the 2 monkeys are named Zong Zong and Hua Hua. I guess that's Chinese for something. But basically, why would you want to do cloning? So, I always envisioned it as a kid as being like, alright, if I was cloned, me personally, another John would be, kind of immediately born next to me, and they would look exactly the same to me at the exact moment. But that's not entirely true. So if I was personally cloned, somebody would have to give birth to a new human being that would adopt all the same genetics as I have, but it would be, 28 years later. So that would be really weird. I hope nobody does that. But why would you want to do this with, an animal like a macaque or a sheep? So I think the only real benefit that comes from it is that you can do further research on organisms that have the exact same initial conditions. So you're looking at how, genetics maybe play into the development of this organism, or maybe even non-genetics. You're looking at maybe how the environment can affect, a certain organism as it grows, and you can actually compare and contrast immediately to the cloned version of that same organism. So you right away have a way to kind of have a control and a variable, where the only thing that's being tested now is exactly what you want, instead of it just being, a variable that you can't control for. So the first thing that kind of comes to mind is the studies that were done on the astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year in space, and basically they're still studying how space radiation has affected his body, his DNA, his bone density, and things like this. And the reason why they chose him for this experiment is because he's got a twin brother. So his genetic information is not identical to, but very, very similar to his brother Mark Kelly. And so you can immediately compare and contrast the space environment or the microgravity environment of spending a year on the International Space Station to, somebody who is genetically similar. So in the article, they talk about how this could be used for research on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, because typically we don't really understand exactly what plays into the non-genetic factors of these diseases, like what are the environmental stimuli that might lead to their development, and how can we better prevent it. So I think this is interesting at face value, but I don't really see it going very far, because primates are not really necessary for doing further studies with. Most, biochemistry studies, when we're trying to, develop medicines or research diseases, come via, laboratory rats, or, pigs are actually a really close organism to what we think, human anatomy might be like. So I think that the primate example is really kind of just a novel thing, and I don't really anticipate it becoming really widespreadly used in the future. But of course, it's interesting that all the same ethical questions can immediately be raised once again. And of course, those ethical questions still do remain. I definitely don't think that human cloning will ever materialize in the future, just because that would be absolutely nuts. But we'll see. Anything's really possible, I guess. So, taking a look at the chat, Tom is with us in the chat. That's awesome. He says that 100% genetically identical, right? Because not even identical twins have that. And another me can do all his homework. I don't know what homework exactly we're doing anymore now that we're, college graduates. But either way, yeah, that would be kind of nice to have, a second you to do all the legwork. If you guys notice that I'm looking down a lot, it's because normally I read kind of my notes off of a document, but this week, since I'm running the streaming software and want to read from the chat, I'm going off the good old-fashioned notebook, and you guys will see it is a graphing notebook. So, if you guys remember last week's poll, I obviously voted for graphing paper. Alright, moving on to number 2. Oop, that's number 1, sorry. Number 2. This one actually, we were tagged in a post on Facebook by Chrissy Cozier, which kind of raised my awareness to this one. This one comes by way from Scientific American. They write, as Cape Town water crisis deepens, scientists prepare for day 0. And then they go on to write, the city's government estimates that day 0, when Cape Town becomes the first major city in the world to run out of water, will come on April 12th. So, what's going on in Cape Town, South Africa, is really kind of a scary thing. They are basically down to the last little bits of their water reserves for the entire city, and they've pretty much calculated exactly when they're going to run out of water. So when I say run out of water, I mean that the water reservoirs that they hold in the city are basically going to drop to about 13.5% of their total capacity. You can't exactly completely run out of water down to 0%, just in the way that those systems kind of work. So the remaining water after this day 0 hits will be reserved for use in hospitals and emergency situations. But this is a really scary situation because there are about 4 million people that live in Cape Town, South Africa currently. And those people are going to have to basically get their water supply from a distribution point, which they're setting up, I think like 200 or so distribution points around the country. And at those distribution points, they'll only be allowed 6.5 gallons per day. So to make do with that little water is sort of a frightening idea, and I just can't see it playing out, very smoothly. I harken back to when Superstorm Sandy hit Long Island, and I think about how we basically ran out of gasoline reserves at a lot of the gas stations across Suffolk County and Nassau County, and basically people had to line up and wait for hours and hours and hours in order to get gasoline to, drive to work and back. And things got really ugly during that time. I remember, not really seeing it in person, but hearing on the news that people were really, really, vicious to one another, cutting lines, threatening one another, and that's only for a commodity in gasoline. I can only imagine how much worse it's going to get when it becomes your drinking water supply, in order to cook with or hydrate yourself or, shower with. That's going to be probably a really, really scary situation for the people living there. In the chat, Karen Riley says, this April 12th, 2018, wow. Yeah, so this is basically, we're down to the wire here, less than 90 days away, and they're pretty much predicting that all the water supply is going to run out. On February 1st, so in just a couple days, residents will be forced to cut water consumption down from what is now 23 gallons per day to 13.2 gallons per day, and so that's basically splitting it, almost in half. And yeah, the problem is that the residents of Cape Town, they've kind of been issuing these mandates to cut the water consumption down, little by little, and hope that sort of prolongs the reservoir. But what they're finding is that, more than half of the people living there are not doing so. They're just kind of still using their water supplies frivolously. And that's kind of the biggest issue. But this isn't something that came out of nowhere. What's going on in Cape Town right now is that they're in the worst drought that they've ever experienced in like the past century. And this has been kind of an ongoing drought for the past 3 years or so. Compounded with that has been a huge spike in the population of the city. So there are more people that have moved into Cape Town, making up those 4 million residents, than the city planners really accounted for. And that's, that's why it's so important when Tom and I talk about, the upcoming 2020 census. That's why it's so important to really look at the trends, look at the numbers, the rate of migration, of people moving in and out, and to really get a good handle on that, because otherwise, things like this can happen, and you can really run out of a valuable resource pretty quickly. Nancy Cletus says, that's frightening. I agree. Yeah, I can't imagine what I would do in that situation. I'd probably just move, honestly. Tom says, when resources are scarce, the animal instincts come out. There are a lot of affluent people in Cape Town, and they are not listening. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm gathering from these articles as well, is that it's hard to tell people that are used to having a lot of the luxuries that they're used to in life to not consume water anymore. They typically don't listen. Karen Riley says, hoarding will begin. Yeah, that's true. I expect that people will do whatever it takes to hold on to their water supplies, ensuring that they have it for future use. Especially, I would even imagine that people would do this beyond, when the rainy season hopefully eventually does come, and this problem, maybe isn't so exasperated anymore. I would imagine that people probably won't trust the city government all that much anymore, and they'll probably just hold on to their water supplies. Karen K asks, how many gallons does the average American use? That's a good question. I would imagine it's probably a higher number than you think. I'm going to try to look it up right now for you. Let's see. Average American water usage. So, according to the United States Geological Survey, it says estimates vary, but each person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water per day. So, that's a lot. A lot more than the 23 gallons per day that they're limiting themselves to in Cape Town right now. Nancy Cleo says, the water crisis is the next big global problem. Yeah, I mean, it could be for certain parts of the world, the parts that are experiencing these drought situations, such as what's going on in California. So, yeah, I mean, we're seeing, droughts like we've never seen before in history. So, I don't really want to just point a finger and say that must be climate change. But, I mean, I feel like it's hand in hand, right? Like, we are definitely seeing the effects of something, so I wouldn't be surprised if climate change plays a big role in what's going on in Cape Town, as well as in California. Alright, moving on. I keep doing that, sorry. Next one comes by way of the United States Geological Survey, who just quoted actually before. This actually occurred on basically Tuesday morning of last week, right after we had done last week's trèSci. I woke up and checked Twitter, and this was kind of the first thing I saw. They say the magnitude 7.9 earthquake occurred as the result of a strike-slip faulting. At its location, the Pacific Plate is converging with the North American Plate. Over the preceding century, 11 other magnitude 7+ earthquakes have occurred within 600 kilometers of today's earthquake. And the earthquake that we are talking about was just south off the coast of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. And this was kind of causing a big stir because there were tsunami warnings issued for most of the Aleutian Islands, coastal Alaska, coastal Washington State, Oregon State, and even California. Because this was a pretty strong earthquake. Magnitude 7.9 is nothing to sneeze at. But luckily, the tsunami never materialized, so those warnings were taken down pretty quickly after the fact, maybe like, I don't know, an hour or two after they had been issued. So, luckily no damage or loss of life really occurred from this earthquake. But I did find it interesting because of the what-if scenario. So, when doing some of the research for the Twitter feed of the USGS, what you'll find is immediately preceding the tweets warning people about the possibility of a tsunami and information about the magnitude of the earthquake and basically what was going on, the tweets immediately before all of this were basically apologizing tweets saying that the USGS Twitter account was going to be offline because of the government shutdown that occurred for just a few days a couple weeks ago. So that struck me as like, well, what if the government was shut down for longer? People would not have, I guess, had as much informational access to what was going on. And, in that scenario, what happens, right? Like, I don't really know the answer, but if it's an emergency situation like that, do we forget about the fact that a governmental shutdown is taking place, and does the person in charge of managing social media accounts for the USGS report to work and disseminate that information as best they can. I don't know, like that's a weird thing to have happen, but I think it just goes to show you that, if the government is shut down, things can happen and people can be in a lot of danger in that situation. Now, luckily nothing really happened, nothing materialized with a tsunami occurring, but it could have, and then what, Those people are just kind of left hanging dry. I know that's not the only way information is disseminated, but it's certainly in today's day and age, where I would go for information first, right? I don't really watch TV or listen to the radio or anything, so I would check Twitter to get kind of basically the fastest traveling information that you can get. So yeah, that just struck me as like an odd little thing to take note of. So why didn't this earthquake cause a tsunami? Well, they mentioned that it's a strike-slip earthquake. So that means that the plate boundary, they're kind of moving, let me see if I can get my hands the right way. They're kind of moving side by side, like this. Instead of it being a subduction zone where one plate is subducting under the other, and then you can have the plate on top sometimes breaks free a little bit and shoots out some energy that can create a massive wave that propels forward. The strike slip basically doesn't have that same mechanism, and what's also nice about the strike slip kind of boundary near the Aleutian Islands is that it's spread over a larger area, and so that energy that makes up the 7.9 earthquake has more area to basically propel itself or kind of get rid of its energy from. So that's good news, because obviously it didn't generate a massive wave like we saw in Japan in 2011 or 2012. Yeah, it didn't really affect anything as far as sea level rise goes. But something to be noted was that in some of the well water systems, all the way as far away as Fort Lauderdale, Florida, they were measuring small spikes in the water levels of these wells. So that just goes to show you that when an earthquake of that magnitude happens, that energy really kind of travels around the entire Earth, and we can see evidence of it all over, which I don't know, that kind of blows my mind a little bit. So, moving on, number 4. This might be actually we're about halfway through. This might be right on time. I was thinking this might be a short episode, but I think we're going to be right on the money. So next up, this comes by way from Elon Musk. He says that aiming for first flight of Falcon Heavy on February 6th from Apollo Launchpad 39A at Cape Kennedy. Easy viewing from the public causeway. And of course, he is talking about the Falcon Heavy rocket that was developed by his company SpaceX. So, SpaceX is basically primed and ready to basically achieve liftoff for the Falcon Heavy rocket, which Tom and I know have been anticipating since we knew it was going to happen early this year. They are hot off the heels of a successful test fire of the 27 first stage engines that took place on Wednesday of this past week. So that all went well. Basically, all we have to do now is set the date and wait for clear weather. And yeah, they're targeting February 6th. They have not announced what time yet, but the Kennedy Space Center is selling tickets already for people to come down and check out basically the first launch of Falcon Heavy. That's really exciting news. I think that Falcon Heavy is hopefully going to be successful, but of course anything can happen, and Elon Musk himself admits to that, so by saying that it should be a spectacle either way. I'm really hoping that they manage to pull it off. In addition to SpaceX, Elon Musk is also, running a few different companies at a time. He's kind of one of the brains behind PayPal, and also he is the brains behind this company called The Boring Company, which I know Tom and I have talked about a little bit in the past. And so The Boring Company is kind of a funny thing where Elon Musk has these ideas of building these Hyperloop tunnels. Basically, they're going to be like fast travel tunnels that you can make it from New York to California in half an hour, or whatever he's claiming it to be. But he's trying to think outside the box on how to fund these projects. So The Boring Company, we talked about in a previous episode of trèSci, where they sell hats as a way to raise money for some of these projects. And the hats were kind of a novel thing, but now it's become even more novel because they're starting to sell flamethrowers. Let me see if I can find the right tab here. Yeah, here we go. And Tom mentions here, Elon Musk has been tweeting about flamethrowers as of late. Yeah, so the Boring Company flamethrower is basically the successor to the hat. He's selling them for $500 a piece. There are 20,000 of them made, and yeah, they are being exclaimed as the safest flamethrower you can buy, and we'll see about that. I'm sure lots of people are going to do really dumb things with these flamethrowers. I was almost tempted myself to empty out the trèSci coffers and splurge on one of these flamethrowers. I was this close to doing it, but I didn't. If Tom and Kyle were here and we all talked about it together, maybe we would have done that. But $500 for a flamethrower is a pretty good deal. So we'll see what happens. We might be able to do some fun things with the flamethrower. But I thought I should mention that to you guys because that's just, I don't know, just so silly to me. Like, you're selling flamethrowers to build Hyperloop, transportation systems, and yet you're the guy that's building proprietary rockets for future space travel. That's insane. Nancy Cleta asks, is this an unmanned launch? Yes, this is unmanned. There are no plans for a manned launch for any rocket system this year that I know off the top of my head. I know NASA and SpaceX have both outlined future manned missions going into 2019 and probably into 2020, but nothing has been planned for manned space travel just yet, besides to and from deliveries to the International Space Station. Tom says, such a wild and hilarious way to make money where, what the hell, LOL? Yeah, exactly. That's my take on it as well. And Karen Riley says, that's crazy. There'll be one in your house, John. My son. Yeah, I did go to your son, my roommate Chris, with a proposition to go in halves on one of these flamethrowers. He was really excited about that prospect, but then I decided to back out because $250 is still a lot of money to spend all in one go. All right, moving on. Not yet. So here we go. Next up, this one comes by way of Rice University. It says Science Rules, and they give us a link here. They say Rice alum Representative Jim Bridenstine, who has been nominated to be NASA administrator, will host Bill Nye the Science Guy at the State of the Union address on January 30th. And there's a nice little picture of Jim and Bill hanging out, best buds. Yeah, I thought this one was just kind of weird and interesting. Jim Bridenstine, we talked about on a previous episode of trèSci, where basically we brought him up when he became the Trump administration's pick for, or nominee for, becoming the next NASA administrator. We kind of just vetted him a little bit, went through and gave our opinions on what we think of the pick. I believe both of us were, pretty much in agreement that he seems like a pretty good fit for the job. Don't know too much about him on a personal level, but he seems to really support what NASA's already doing. He has a pretty clear vision for how the United States can lead in hopefully very soon space as a very soon. How do I want to word this? Hopefully as an imminent spacefaring culture. He does supposedly take credence in what's going on with climate change, so that's important because NASA does a lot of studying the climate. So that was kind of something that I know a lot of people were looking towards with him. And it's interesting to me that he's going to host Bill Nye at the State of the Union. Bill Nye, who has become pretty outspoken about his views on climate change and really kind of striking up an audience with the more liberal Democratic side of what's going on in the country today. Jim Bridenstine, I believe, is a Republican, so it's kind of nice, in my opinion, to see that this divide that we find ourselves in today's world is not, all-encompassing, I guess would be the way I would put it. It looks like Jim and Bill can sort of set aside their differences and, attend the State of the Union together. I'm a little confused as to why Jim would pick Bill to host at the State of the Union. So I kind of look at that as a pretty shrewd political move. In my opinion, it seems like Jim is almost trying to appeal to the Democrats in the Senate who have yet to basically vote him in as the next NASA administrator. That being said, I still don't think that the two of those guys would be posing for a picture together if they weren't able to put their differences aside and sort of look at where we're going in terms of what we're doing in space and sort of find common ground there. I know between me kind of figuring out the OBS system here and getting the stream up and running, I know Bill Nye has actually tweeted out a few things about his attendance at the State of the Union tomorrow. Basically going as far to say things such as he's just going as a representative, being the CEO of the Planetary Society, which was basically a foundation started by the late Carl Sagan. He's just going as a representative of that organization. He doesn't endorse the Trump administration. He doesn't necessarily endorse Jim Bridenstine to be the next NASA administrator, but, he's just going anyway, I guess. Yeah, it's very interesting to watch Bill Nye dip his toes into politics. I think it's, I don't know. I don't think it's what he does best. I think he's, a really good science communicator, especially for really young audiences. When I'm teaching classes on behalf of BNL, all the kids still seem to love him. So I really like for him to just kind of stick to doing that. But, this might be a move that he really wants to make. So we'll see what comes of it. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that Jim Bridenstine should be the next NASA administrator? Do you guys think that Bill Nye will ever dip his toes and run for an elected office? Yeah, I'm curious to know. Next up, this one comes by way of Rocket Lab. They say, introducing the Humanity Star, a bright, blinking satellite now orbiting Earth, visible to the naked eye in the night sky. Launched on #StillTesting, The Humanity Star is designed to encourage everyone to look up and consider our place in the universe. Website coming soon. So, I think Tom and I mentioned this as just kind of an offhanded sort of thing. But basically, there's this company, Rocket Lab. They're a private company based out of New Zealand, and they've developed a proprietary system, a rocket, to launch this Humanity Star. Basically what you see in the picture on the screen. And this is causing kind of a large stir, especially among professional and amateur astronomers, because, as they say, it's a bright, reflecting object that blinks across the sky, the night sky. And researchers are taking issue with this because if you're somebody that's, doing astronomy research, working on a PhD, let's just say, and your target is, a particular star that maybe is changing in brightness, or I don't know, who knows. You're using state-of-the-art telescopes to image this object, to conduct your research. There's only so much telescope time to go around. There are other researchers that are, making a case for why their research is important enough to use a telescope for, let's say 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, while you're observing, what it is you're looking at, this bright Humanity Star just causes a streak right across your data set. And you gotta throw out your data because that's what it does. I can definitely see where the astronomy community is coming from, being upset about this because, yeah, as Karen Riley says, is that the only purpose? Yeah, it's basically just a giant man-made piece of junk that went up into orbit. Now, I do also think, just from my own conjecture of like looking at Twitter and I follow a whole bunch of different astronomers. I do think that this is being a little bit overblown, especially when you look at the finer details. So the Humanity Star will be in orbit for 9 months, at which point it will eventually, have enough gravitational pull on it from the Earth that it will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn up, so that it won't even basically come back down or be captured again. And more on when things do that in just a second. But yeah, it's kind of like, what are the odds that it is going to really affect anybody's data? Probably not great, because the visible sky is large, and for one small object to streak across, chances are it's not going to happen to you, but the chances are it is going to happen to somebody. And I think that's where everybody kind of takes issue with this particular thing. But I do also want to make mention of the company itself, Rocket Lab, which I think they're kind of doing something a little interesting. I think I mentioned they're based out of New Zealand. They do have an office in LA, which I think they do a lot of their business dealings with, because going to New Zealand is, expensive and kind of out of the way. But yeah, the whole launch took place from New Zealand. The rocket was developed in New Zealand. Yeah, it's kind of like New Zealand's first foray into the space race, which I think is kind of interesting. And I do want to applaud the founder, Peter Beck, for kind of being a visionary in that sense. I think it is silly to use this as your entry point into becoming a player in the commercial space venture. It sounds nice at first glance, like, as I read that tweet to you guys, it's probably like, oh, well, that's nice, we're going to inspire people to look up. But, it would have been nice if maybe you included some, some instrumentation on this particular piece of equipment to maybe allow young students to do some experimentation with. I would have much rather preferred at least some usefulness other than just, hey, we want you to look up at the sky, because, well, that's why we have stars, you know? That's why we have the International Space Station. Going back a little bit, Karen Riley says she'd vote for Bill Nye. Yeah, I don't know. Bill is probably not my top choice to be in office. I just feel burned on the whole Donald Trump thing, so I'm really not trying to vote for anybody who's already made an established name for themselves outside of politics. But, you know, doesn't mean he would do a bad job. I guess we have to sort of give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Tom says, yeah, it's so silly. Yeah, I agree. It's kind of a waste. And Karen Riley says, yeah, what a waste of funding. Yeah, I agree. It's like you raised all this money to basically develop a proprietary rocket system, and you kind of just splurged it all on shooting nothing but an annoying rock into space. Yeah. If I was going to be mean, I would call the founder of Rocket Lab the poor man's Elon Musk. But I'm not going to be mean. See what I did there. Next up, I should have labeled these. This one comes by way from Ryan Nash, the American Hero, tagged us on Facebook. This was basically, oh boy, let's see, can I make the video play? Let's check it out. 1 second. Yes, here we go. This one was actually something that occurred not this past week, but the week before. Comes by way of CNN International, basically. Flashing light in the night sky in Michigan on Tuesday is likely a meteor, National Weather Service says. Talking about Tuesday, January 16th, when a large meteor was spotted in Michigan. You can see some footage here. Dashboard cameras and whatnot. Basically, this large fireball that lights up the night sky. Pretty cool stuff. And basically, this meteor was large enough to create what's known as a sonic boom. So, any meteor was making its way into. Oh boy, I can only hear the video. Oh, geez. Sorry about that. Let me swap here. Thanks for the heads up on that. Sorry if you guys couldn't hear me before. Basically, what I was saying is that this meteor was large enough to create a sonic boom that was basically, so if you have a meteor that is entering Earth's atmosphere, it's traveling so fast that it's going to burn up just by friction with the air molecules that make up Earth's atmosphere. So what that means is this object was large enough that the burning of it caused, you know, a huge, you know, brightness increase in the night sky. It also pushed so much air in front of it that, yeah, it created what we call a sonic boom. A large booming noise was heard from many sources in Michigan, and it was so impactful. It didn't actually strike the surface, but it was so impactful that it caused seismometers in the area to basically register it as a magnitude earthquake, which that's kind of insane. That doesn't mean that a magnitude 2 earthquake took place because of this meteorite, but basically the instruments that we use to detect earthquakes detected this event. So here is the National Weather Service from Detroit tweeting out information about the meteor, and they say, along with NASA, National Weather Service Detroit suspects that debris from the meteor was detected about 10,000 feet above the ground near Hamburg, and I don't know what they meant by the end there. But basically, yeah, so you can use satellite data to kind of detect how far above the ground this meteor got, and lo and behold, meteorite fragments actually did break off from the larger intact meteor and made their way all the way down to the ground, where this gentleman, according to space.com, found a piece of the meteorite. So they say Fireball finds meteorite fragments from dazzling Michigan meteor found on ice. And this dude is, you know, a bit wealthier because of it. So I like his hat. It must have been pretty cold out there. Or he didn't want his identity revealed. But yeah, that's a pretty nice sized meteorite fragment to find, worth probably a few $1,000s in my best estimate. And I would imagine, you know, if I was him, I would definitely sell that baby off to a researcher to study, you know, what it's made up of, or to a museum of some sort. But yeah, meteorite hunting that's a pretty cool thing to do. You know, easier to do in areas where it is snowy, because as the meteorite kind of comes down, typically they are what we would call mafic in geology, so more towards the blacker colors of the spectrum. So if they land on top of ice, they're really simple to find. Well, not really simple to find, but like simpler to find than if you were to try and look for them, you know, in the woods, I guess. So that's pretty much all the news that I have for you guys this week. I do want to bring up the poll. So this week, the Friday poll came down to Mars versus Pluto. I thought this would be kind of an interesting one because we're starting to learn more and more and more about Mars, you know, as a planetary body. We've got rovers there. You know, we know that water existed there at one point. We know about the atmosphere. We want to go there as humans. And then Pluto, on the other hand, is kind of like a fan favorite because, you know, it's the furthest planet, or not planet anymore. It's the furthest, what was the furthest planet from the sun for a long time, before it was demoted from planetary status to dwarf planet. So I know it holds a soft spot in a lot of people's hearts. And New Horizon imaged Pluto up close and personal for the first time back in 2000 and... Oops, sorry. Back in 2015, I think? 2016? I don't remember. So basically, I wanted to bring the poll to these two objects, and the winner was Mars, believe it or not, with 15 votes. Pluto gave it a good run for its money with 13 votes, but the winner this week was Mars. So there you have it. One more thing before I leave you guys for this week. I was asked a question. This one came by way from Karen Riley, who is a school teacher, and actually this really comes by way from one of her students, Aaron. So it's Aaron via Karen asking trèSci, and the question was, is a fish wet while it's submerged in water? So I really wish Tom was on the show with me right now, because this sounds like a question that when Tom and I were in high school we might ask each other and really, you know, try to convince ourselves of some, you know, universal truth about what is wetness. The short answer to this, in my personal opinion, is yes, the fish is wet when it is submerged in water. Water is wet, just by definition, so if you're in water, you are wet. But I understand where this sort of semantical question comes from, because if a human is submerged in water and then comes out of that water, we would say that that is when the human is wet, when it is no longer in the water, but in an environment where it should be dry, but there's still water on it. So if a fish is always in an environment where it is surrounded by water, do we classify that as being wet? I don't know. I mean, I guess it comes down to semantics at that point, but I still think you know, since we define what being wet is, then I would say that, yes, any creature, objects, or anything that is submerged in water, therefore is necessarily wet, even if it lives there. That's just my 2 cents on it. But what do you guys think? Is a fish wet while it's submerged in water? Is it dry if you take it out of the water? Fish are kind of typically like wet for a little while, even when you go to cook them, they're like still kind of juicy. I know when I was doing Blue Apron, one of the first steps was always to pat down the fish with paper towels to try and get it as dry as possible before you cook it. So I don't know, kind of a silly thought question for you guys, but I enjoyed it. So thank you for asking, Aaron and Karen, if the fish is wet while it's in water. All right, guys, that's pretty much it for the week. Yeah, the only other thing that I had written down here was if I had time left over, I was going to do a quick review of Blue Planet 2, Episode 1. I caught up on Episode 1, over the past weekend? Yeah, a few days ago. I don't know. I tweeted out when I was watching it. It's awesome. If you guys aren't watching Blue Planet 2, you should. So many cool, interesting, deep sea creatures, fish that are wet, I would say. Doing just incredible things. Bottlenose dolphins that are riding the waves just because they do it for the fun of it. There was a fish that changed from female to male because it was being accosted by a male fish, so it changed into a male and chased off the other male. Watching orcas stun fish by slapping them with their tails. It's just really phenomenal footage. So yeah, check that out. And I'm sure that Tom and I will talk more about episodes 2 and 3, which I hope to catch up on this weekend on next week's episode. Last thing I'll leave you with before I go is this Wednesday is a super blue blood moon. Basically the second full moon of the month makes it a blue moon. It's a super moon again, meaning that the moon is close to Earth in its orbit. It's going to be a blood moon because it's going to be a partial lunar eclipse for the west coast, so it'll have a red tint to it. Basically, it's a trifecta of different moon phenomena. So go check out the super blue blood moon if you get a chance and we get clear skies. You know I will be. Other than that, have a fantastic week. We'll be back next week with both Tom and Kyle, so it should be a regular episode, and look forward to seeing you guys there. Take it easy. Until then, bye.